once everyone, and also Runa Anson will just talk briefly about the latest decisions on Russia.
Jackie, thank you very much. And the reason that this guy's sitting actually centre stage in the middle is because the athletes in my world will always be centre stage, and Iñaki Gomez has just been elected as the chair of the Athletes Commission. His deputy chair will be Valerie Adams, who's actually currently on maternity leave. Olivier and Runa, you know and are familiar with, but before I kick off, would you like to say a few words?
Sure. I'll just say a short note, but obviously it's an honor and a privilege to have been entrusted with this important position by my fellow commission members. I think there's a lot of work to do, and we're just happy to be here. Like you said, it's sort of symbolic that I'm here in the middle, but it's important to remember that athletes are at the center of this sport, and going forward, it needs to be that way. So thank you, Seb. Thank you.
Iñaki, thank you. I don't think I probably need to remind anybody that we've actually just emerged from one of the most successful world indoor athletics championships of all time. And this is a good opportunity, and I do need to take it, given the building that we're sitting in, is really to thank the organising committee, the Birmingham City Council, the athletes, of course, and the fans who fought through pretty extraordinary weather conditions to be here. Let me just briefly take you through the top line statistics. 133 member federations competed, including our ANAs. We had 554 athletes. We had 1 world record. We had 6 championship records. We had 8 area records. We had 5 reallocated medals in ceremonies, and we had 18 disqualifications. Whilst we haven't finished our council meeting today, and I need to make that quite clear, and I do apologise, I will be starting the meeting promptly this afternoon. I'd like to take this opportunity to go through a few of the decisions that we've made, and we'll then hand over to Rune to talk about his task force recommendations, which he gave during the course of the morning on the reinstatement of the Russian member federation. The first decision this morning was a very, very big decision. It's an issue that has been debated and discussed pretty much in every forum in the last few years, and one of particular prominence amongst the athletes, and that's the sensitive issue of hyperandrogenism. And that was the first decision that we took this morning. I think it is clear that this is probably one of the toughest subjects that the Council and I are discussing. And I want to make one point really clear, crystal clear up front. This is not about cheating. No HA athletes have cheated. This is about our responsibility as a sports international federation to ensure, in simple terms, a level playing field. It is our sport, and it is up to us to decide the rules and the regulations. To draw the lines for that competition, we choose to have 2 classifications for our competitions, men's events and women's events. This means we need to be clear about the competition criteria for those 2 categories. In the same way that a boxer who competes in a weight category must make weight or move into a different weight class, our athletes need to abide by competition rules that we set. We have always believed that testosterone, either naturally occurring or artificially inserted into the body, provides significant performance advantages. I think there is little question about that. We were asked by the Court of Arbitration for Sport to provide the evidence regarding the magnitude of this advantage, which we now have, and the Council has been taken through this morning. Based on this information, the Council approved the request to revise our competition regulations for track events over distances between 400 metres and 1 mile, including 1 mile. There are some drafting details that will need to be revised, and we will be communicating with the Court of Arbitration before we release the full regulations. But the aim is to have the adopted regulations in place on the 1st of November this season. The second, and again, this is an issue that many of you have discussed with me and across the athletics body, is transfers of allegiance. And again, this is a sensitive and complicated issue. A lot of detailed work has been done on transfer of allegiance. The guiding principle is, for me, fairly simple. It is to have the vest that you start your international career in be the one that you end your career in. Of course, there have to be exceptions. We recognize that. And how we treat those is an important part of the next phase of the work. But crucially, today, the Council agreed to a set of principles that include a minimum 3-year waiting period for athletes wanting to transfer from one country to another, the establishment of a review panel that will determine the credibility of those applications, evidence that countries are offering full citizenship and associated rights, and verification of that. An athlete transfers only once in their career, and there can be no transfers before the age of 20. While the specific rules are being drafted for the approval of the Council, our next Council meeting in July, we will maintain the current freeze on transfers. The third, again, a big piece of work, is the coordination of the global calendar. And again, this has been a debate within the sport for simply as long as I can remember. We've spent, again, many months consulting on the global calendar for athletics to create an understandable and set rhythm to our sport, which will help our athletes and fans and articulate the narrative. 30 meetings and working groups have been held. Almost 1,000 emails and telephone calls have been made, and over 20,000 kilometers traveled to reach each and every of the 500 people and groups we wanted to consult, including the athletes, coaches, member federations, athletes' representatives, media, meet organizations, commercial partners, broadcasters, distributors, fans, and spectators. The framework agreed today for all the World Athletics Series events is about fixed dates and clear anchor points in our season. I won't go through every one of the detailed dates. We can present those to you later. But it is clear that from the beginning of the season, we seek fixed dates for our World Cross Country Championships, our World Indoor Championships, our World Half Marathon, our Race Walk Team Championships in a few months' time, our World Relays, our Under-20 Championships, and of course our World Championships outdoors. And this does mean that our season will end with the World Championships. Let me, while you're absorbing all that, hand over to Olivier.
Thank you, Seb. I'm really happy and delighted to report today that this morning, Council approved a new alliance with Ticketmaster, who will provide ticketing services to our global portfolio of events from 2019 to 2021. As part of these services, Ticketmaster will provide access to a consolidated ticketing platform that will provide enhanced and value-added support to local organizing committees, LOCs. We can then leverage the services to sell tickets and drive revenue for the local events. I think it goes without saying that having one ticketing service partner will significantly simplify the ticketing process for our events and the work of our LOCs. And it will ensure a consistent experience for the athletics fans, no matter what part of the world they live in. And these two aspects were quite critical for us. So it's very useful for LOCs of our events, of IAAF events, so that they can access a global network of fans rather than only relying on building a fan base every time from scratch. As far as fans concerned, they can keep their profiles and preferences into that database, and after that receive information and about all future athletic events that they would be interested in, therefore simplifying their process and allowing them to attend more of our events. Seb?
Olivier, thank you very much. Rune reported on the work of the task force this morning to our council. Rune, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Seb. So the task force recommended to the Council, and the Council accepted that RUSAF not be reinstated. Because while many reinstatement conditions have been met, there are several that still have not been satisfied. For example, RUSAF and RUSADA have still not provided a test distribution plan for 2018 that shows an adequate amount of testing of Russian athletes. RUSAF has still not demonstrated that it has fixed previous legal issues that meant it was unable to enforce provisional doping bans on athletes' coaches. RUSADA has not yet identified the athletes who provided samples that show up positive for prohibited substances in Moscow LIMS data provided to the AIU by WADA. The Russian authorities have still not yet acknowledged the institutional doping scheme uncovered by McLaren and the Schmidt Commission, which means there is no comfort it will not be repeated. RUSADA has still not yet been reinstated by WADA as a fully compliant, autonomous and independent NATO. The task force will now call for an urgent meeting with RUSAF and the Russian Ministry of Sport to impress upon them the need to address these remaining issues without further delay. The Council agreed that if progress is not made, at the next Council meeting in July 2018, further measures should be discussed, including withdrawing permission for Russian athletes to compete as neutral athletes in international competition, and ultimately taking the steps necessary to recommend to Congress that RUSAF be expelled from IAAF membership. Thank you, Seb.
Bruno, thank you very much. I'm not sure that in the history of our sport, and certainly not in any of my time on the IAAF Council, have we made more monumental decisions in the course of one morning, whether it's about hyperandrogenism, transfers of allegiance, the work that we've been doing around calendar and the change to our competition structures, and the reinforced and tough position that we take on all issues of anti-doping. This afternoon we will be reported to by the AIU on the status of the 5 countries that are currently on the watch list. There is a huge amount of work that is taking place. There is a huge amount of change that is taking place, and I'd just like to thank my colleagues for that support and the direction of travel, which is really very, very important in changing the face and the nature of our sport. So thank you very much for being here. Jackie.
So questions, normal procedure, please. If you could just put your hand up. Has everyone got microphones? Or are you walking around? Yeah, just press the microphone. But please let us know name and where you're from, although we recognise most of you. Go. Martin.
Seb, it's Martin Ziegler from The Times. I'm just going to ask you about the Select Committee report. Is it uncomfortable reading for you to see in black and white a report from MPs that you made misleading remarks to a Select Committee?
We've read the report, we've absorbed it, and I did not mislead the Select Committee.
Tarek Pans from the New York Times. Just on the same vein, because it was yesterday, I guess. Do you wish you were a little bit more inquisitive when you received the email and phone call from Dave Bedford at all, in hindsight now?
Look, if you don't actually believe that I don't have a computer, or that I don't sit poring over emails all day, and that I don't open attachments, then probably there's not a great deal more I can say on this subject.
Steve.
sort of just continuing on the same theme, Seb, the conclusion by the committee, although you say you didn't mislead them, is that you did, and that has been hugely damaging to your reputation and the reputation of the IAAF. Do you accept that in any way? Do you think your reputation as a result of this report has been diminished?
No, I can't account for answers that I gave to that select committee session that have been attached to entirely different questions, but that will be the response, of course, that we make to the select committee and to that group of members of Parliament.
Seb, could I ask you whether you feel sadness that Sir Dave Brailsford, Sir Bradley Wiggins, such an important part of London 2012, find their reputations in tatters now? And do you think that athletics is more trusted than cycling is?
I'm certainly not answering any questions here on cycling. It's not my responsibility to do that. And I'm certainly, you know, everything that we've done in the sport, the 200 changes, the suspension of the Russian Federation, the implementation of the Athletic Integrity Unit, which is absolutely central to those reforms, and the journey that we've taken in the last 2 years tells me we're in much better shape than we were 2 years ago. It's for others to judge what we have done, but it's not what I say. I think it's what we've actually achieved as a sport. So no, our sport is not in tatters. It is extremely strong. If you look back to the World Athletics Championships in London last year, we had 720,000 people through the stadium. We had we would have had actually packed stadia here in Birmingham had it not been for the challenges of the first few days. So no, you know, the sport is strong. We will absorb any of the conclusions drawn by the Select Committee. Look, you know, we have a commonality of interest here. You know, as a sport, we want exactly what that group of members of Parliament wants, which is the eradication of drugs in sport and a roadmap to that. I think we have provided a roadmap, not just at a national level, but I think it's become a template. We have an Athletics Integrity Unit, which is quite unique. It's the first of its kind in the world. We have made 200 changes. We've cleared the sight lines in the organisation, so member federations know exactly what their responsibility is, right up to my office. So I think we should take stock. We're not sitting on our laurels here. There's a lot more to be done, but the sport is not in tatters. It's extremely strong.
Seb, Richard Conley from BBC. You've made it clear that you don't think the sport is in tatters. In the Select Committee report, the University of Tübingen study is mentioned at some length, and the suggestion seems to be that the IAAF in some way wanted to suppress it, wouldn't release it, questioned its methodology. Would you now, as a sign of public confidence, or to restore public confidence, commission a fresh report along those lines? And in terms of the reading of the emails, do you think, as the head of a world governing body, it's a credible position not to be reading emails and attachments in your position? Have you now changed your working methods in light of this criticism, or since you gave that evidence?
Well, I wasn't actually head of the International Federation at that time, but you know, my approach in the whole of my working life has been to entirely focus on what is in hand. And let me be really clear about those emails. I fundamentally believed then, as I do to this very day, and it would be the same advice I would give somebody that came to me with whatever allegation they had heard or they were making, is to make sure that information gets absolutely into the entirely appropriate organisation to deal with it. And the email that you are particularly referring to, that went to the Ethics Board. Anybody that is in any doubt about anything they receive now, I would, and have publicly said, you get that into the hands of the Athletics Integrity Unit. The Ethics Board was in large part driven across the line by me, and the Athletics Integrity Unit is entirely there through the reforms that my colleagues have supported. So that is a fundamental principle which I will never demur from.
The study. Yeah. Sorry, Richard, your question was, would we...
In terms of that study, which was obviously now 7 years ago, as a sign of the confidence you have when you say the sport is not in tatters, would you commission a fresh report with a similar methodology to athletes and publish the results to show that, that doping is not as prevalent as that report seemed to suggest it was?
I think there's a broader point here, that now we have the Athletic Integrity Unit in place. We have so many structures within the Athletic Integrity Unit that are of a scientific nature, an investigative nature, a disciplinary nature, that actually that report is probably not particularly relevant anymore. So the work that the organisation is now doing is actually, it is inevitable that over 7 years, massive advancements have been made, both in personal understanding, the scientific understanding, and of course the governances that are now in place that we didn't have in place before.
I would just add, I mean, I've been involved in this reform process right from the start. I got involved as an athlete representative from my NACAC region in 2016, and I've seen the transformation that has happened. To answer your question on the issues of doping, whether it's been eradicated, we know it hasn't, but that's the general sporting issue. I think this organization has taken the steps, creating an independent body that will address those issues, and the council itself has taken very hard measures in dealing with those issues, taking hard stance on Russia, which has not been done by other organizations. So I think it's clear that the group here is trying to make sure that this sport continues to progress in the right direction, and me as the Athletes Commission chair, and on behalf of the Athletes Commission, we feel confident that we're heading in the right direction.
Yes, Michael.
Michael Pavitt from Inside the Games. Seb, Laura Muir was quoted today. She was not going to speak to DeBarber over the ongoing situation with her coach. What does it say about the trust that athletes have in the sport if they're not sure about the validity of their rival?
If I'm being honest here, there's probably there's nothing new about those relationships. Athletes feel very, very strongly about all sorts of things. What I would really strongly suggest is, as I've said to Richard a few moments ago, if anybody has any substantive evidence about anything that they would like to take further, then the Athletic Integrity Unit, the Athletes Commission, we now have systems and structures in place to receive this type of information, including, and I don't want to get too detailed on the day, but a portal that hundreds of athletes have registered concerns, and sanctions have actually come about from that portal, and it gives them the opportunity to express their issues, their concerns, and we do follow up on them.
Mark?
Mark Bisner, Around the Rings. How disappointed are you with Russia's lack of progress towards the goals that you've set out? And also, what do you think of the IOC's decision to lift the ban on Russia after just 3 months? A bit of a fudge, it seems.
Well, the IOC's decision is a matter for them. We don't benchmark what we do against any sporting organisation. Look, as a former athlete who came into this sport to propagate and develop the ambitions of athletes, I want to see the best athletes of their generation in competition. But we as a sport has a responsibility to make sure that athletes compete on the basis that they are not putting into jeopardy the ambitions, half the young lives that they actually dedicate to their sport, by allowing athletes from tainted systems that we know are tainted to be walking away with the spoils. So yes, of course, as a president of a federation, I want to see the whole family competing, but I also have to recognize that it's not just about how many numbers can we get to a world championship or how many federations. It's what confidence do we have that when those federations and those athletes are in that arena, that they are from systems that we have confidence in, and that is absolutely that's our driving philosophy here.
Matt?
Sorry, Seb, one more on the DCMS report. We've heard the answer around the email a few times, and I know you've written about it in the Evening Standard as well. The committee report also refers to a telephone conversation with Bedford, texts, and then, of course, a meal, he says, sometime afterwards, where he felt that you showed no indication that you hadn't grasped, hadn't understood what he was trying to tell you. These are the things that the MPs picked up on. Do you have any comment to make about that?
Not really, because I have answered those questions. I've answered questions that I've referred to earlier in the committee, and I answered the questions that came back to me as a supplementary on those other issues.
Okay, Tariq.
Just on Russia, and then one for Olivier as well, if that's all right. The list that Rune went through included that they acknowledge there was a systematic doping program. Now, they've said from the very highest level that they're not going to do that. How do you move on from that if they don't do this? Yeah.
Well, it is a very difficult question to answer how we move on from that, because this is entirely in the hands of Russia and the Russian leadership. How they want to deal with the acknowledgement of the reports that have been submitted by McLaren and Schmidt is something they will have to come forward with. For us, we just need to get that acknowledgement, because if we don't, we cannot move forward. It's impossible.
Right, so in your answer earlier on when you were going through the summary, you said in the end you're going to have to say, right, we're going to have to ban all Russian athletes. When do you get to that point?
Yep, go.
Yeah, I think that's probably appropriate for me to take. That is a matter for the Council. The recommendation from the task force this morning, which was unanimously accepted, is that we can't just sit here if there are still gaps in that verification criteria forever and a day. You know, it is a costly process, it is time consuming, and unless, you know, dramatic progress is made, and we genuinely hope it is being made, that we will have to review in our council meeting in July the status of the neutral competitors and the potential for the Congress to decide upon the ultimate sanction, I guess, which is expulsion. But I think that is not sitting there as a threat. It is actually sitting there because we want this situation resolved. It's in nobody's interest to be sitting here in sort of no man's land waiting for, you know, maybe a minor tweak here or a minor tweak there. There's no ambiguity about the criteria. And it is always worth remembering that that criteria was not unilaterally laid on the table. It was agreed, of course, with the new Russian Federation. We want that country back in the fold, and we want their athletes, and the world needs to know that those athletes are in a system of confidence and trust.
Other questions, because Councillor, yes, gentleman there, and then Matt will go to you.
Fumi Saito from Kyoto News. You made an announcement last November to introduce world ranking system, which system is supposed to be used for the World Championships and Olympic Games qualification. Where do you stand right now regarding this introduction of the world ranking system?
Well, actually, the Council is about to receive an updated report on the progress that we're making across the world ranking system. The system is really to give some objectivity into our ranking lists. You know, in tennis, in most major sports, you know who the number one is. That's not always clear cut in our sport. And it's really a tool for our federations. It's a tool for the International Federation to help with the hierarchy of events. It is a tool for selection. But these are tools that can be used or not. But I do think it is important that across so many different disciplines, we are genuinely able to say that so-and-so is the #1 woman in the world at shot put, or so-and-so is the #1 man at 800-meter running. And it's really a tool. And I think it will help the public understand a little bit more about our stars and the hierarchy of our stars. We're not saying that those athletes have to be selected. The selection criteria will always sit with the member federations. That's a pretty important philosophy. But it sits also, this is not an isolated piece of work, because if you look at the work we're doing around the global calendar, which has just been agreed how we take forward, if you look at the work we're doing around one-day meetings, the work we're doing around maybe changes of format to our championship events, and certainly how we continue to innovate and excite and remain relevant to young people. So it's very much a part of that bigger picture.
Question to Matt.
Thanks very much.
Yay.
Yeah. A few really quick ones. Was anyone from Russia here to lobby on their behalf? So, no. We haven't said anything about the hypoandrogenism situation. Where does this leave you with WADA and possible ongoing appeals? And then a last very quick one to Olivier. Why are you leaving?
I'll take HA, yeah. Look, again, let me be clear. We're not sitting here saying that any of these athletes are cheats or dopers. You know, we are sensitive. We have wives, sisters, daughters. And that was the point that was consistently made around the table. Where does it leave us? We have agreed the clear principles and the guiding directions. We were asked by the Court of Arbitration to reprise, and that is what we will do. We were given the scientific rationale this morning for the direction of travel, and we were given the legal underpinning and interpretation around that. And we had a very detailed discussion about it, but we feel that this is the right route for the next stage, which of course is to the court.
So, Matt, with the final the final rules need to be written, and then they will be given to CAS, and then they will be given to everybody else. But the aim is to try and end up with the new regulations in place on the 1st of November. So in the next few weeks, the regulations will be to CAS, and then we'll be announcing them in full. Sorry, Olivier. Oh.
Matt, I thought I was very open, very candid in the release yesterday about the reasons. I'm very proud of all the work we've done over the past 18 months, of the team that we've brought in the organization, all the changes that we've made, some that you've seen, some that you might not have seen because they're more internally focused. But I thought I expressed clearly that this was about the commercial framework that pre-exists this administration, and that limits what I can do. So we thought it was best to move on and allow the IAAF to grow, because it's a critical piece of the future.
Right, Martin, this really is the last question because the bell goes in 5 minutes.
So, Seb, you've inherited this very, very lengthy partnership with Dentsu, and it seems to be causing you a huge amount of problem that you're losing a chief executive as a result of this contract which you inherited from your predecessor. How big a problem is this?
First of all, let me thank Olivier for the sterling work that's been achieved in a relatively short space of time across a whole range of issues. And, you know, somebody coming in from outside the sport, then that's probably equally challenging as well. And I'm very grateful for that commitment. Look, the Dentsu relationship is a contractual relationship, and we need to get that into the kind of shape where we have a mutual understanding about the future direction of the sport, and that's exactly where we are at this moment.
Okay, guys, thank you very much. We have to start the count again at 2.
I think this room's being used again.